King George V was the King of the United Kingdom from May 1910 until his death in 1936. He was a king who oversaw a huge degree of political change inside of his lands, and he also oversaw the First World War. But despite the falling empires of his cousins Nicholas II of Russia and Kaiser Wilhelm II, the British Empire expanded during his reign, and he was seen as a king who was well respected. However, King George V was a man who throughout his reign was very ill, and he was not a very well man as the First World War took a significant toll on his health. But there is a belief that the king was actually murdered by his own doctors as he was ill, as they finished him off whilst he was on his deathbed. But what is the story of this? George V, since the First World War, had suffered from a number of serious bouts of illness, and he suffered from chronic bronchitis, and this was made worse by the fact he was a very heavy smoker. Around 1935 he used oxygen tanks, and these were kept by his bedside, and around this time it was said that the king was packing up his luggage and was getting ready to depart, meaning that the king was going to die soon. As 1936 came around, King George V became bedbound inside of Sandringham House in Norfolk, and as January continued it was clear that the king was gravely ill. Throughout his life, when he was sick, he had been recommended to go and recover abroad, and even took cruises to try and recover his health. But to those within the royal family, it was clear he was going to die. His favourite sister, Victoria, had died in the December of 1935, which depressed him greatly, and over the next few days in the January of 1936 his condition got weaker. It was said by the Prime Minister who visited him that each time he became conscious it was some kind inquiry or kind observation of someone, some words of gratitude for kindness shown. But he did say to his secretary when he sent for him, "How is the Empire?" An unusual phrase in that form, and the secretary said, "All is well, sir, with the Empire," and the king gave him a smile and then relapsed once more into unconsciousness. However, by the 20th of January, King George V was very close to his death. He was attended on by his royal doctors, and Lord Dawson of Penn, the lead physician, issued a report saying, "The king's life is moving peacefully to its close." However, it was reported that the king's final words were, "God damn you." And he said this to his nurse, Catherine Black, who gave him a sedative in the evening. However, Lord Dawson of Penn would write in his diary later how it was not nature that ended the king's life. However, he admitted that it was actually he who ended the king's life and killed him. Dawson was said to have been a supporter of the gentle growth of euthanasia and of pushing a patient towards death in their final way by making them comfortable and finishing them off. He wrote of King George V's death that, "At about 11 o'clock it was evident that the last stage might endure for many hours, unknown to the patient, but little comporting with that dignity and serenity which he so richly merited and which demanded a brief final scene. Hours of waiting just for the mechanical end, when all that is really life has departed, only exhausts the onlookers and keepers them so strained that they cannot avail themselves of the solace of thought, communion, or prayer. I therefore decided to determine the end and injected myself morphia, 3/4 grains, and shortly afterwards cocaine, 1 grain, into the distended jugular vein in about quarter an hour, breathing quieter, appearance more placid, physical struggles gone. With this, the king had been injected by Lord Dawson of Penn by this concoction of medication that then led to his death. He claimed that he did this to preserve the dignity of the king and to end his life peacefully and to allow the royal family to see him slipping away rather than to die a painful end. He also did this at a specific time so it could be announced in the morning edition of the Times newspaper rather that of the evening newspaper. The Queen, who was very religious, it's believed, would not have allowed this and would not have allowed her husband to be treated in this manner and ultimately euthanized. And the Prince of Wales, the heir to the throne, was not consulted on this either. The royal family did not want George V to have a lot of pain and suffering, but they did not want his life to be artificially put to an end, and they did not approve of the actions of the doctor. On the afternoon of the 22nd of January 1936, 2 days after his death, the king's coffin was taken to a nearby parish church, and then the next morning it was taken to a railway station, and the coffin was then taken back to London. The coffin of the king arrived at Westminster Hall, and the imperial state crown was placed on top of the coffin, and this had actually fallen onto the floor during the procession. Over the next few days, the coffin of George V lay in state, with members of the public visiting to pay their respects, and many members of the royal family and foreign dignitaries also paid their respects. The funeral procession began at 9:45 a.m. on the 28th of January, and the coffin was pulled by 142 naval sailors, and the plan for the funeral to take place inside of St George's Chapel in Windsor Castle. The coffin made its way from central London to Windsor and was loaded onto the funeral train, and it eventually got to Windsor for the funeral. King George V was initially buried in the royal vault beneath the choir at St George's Chapel, and he was then interred inside of a huge tomb and sarcophagus in the north nave aisle of the chapel in the February of 1939. This was done after the tomb effigy was finished, and then following her death, Queen Mary was laid to rest next to her husband in the March of 1953. But King George V's death is one which today is incredibly controversial, as he was finished off by his doctors, who for a number of reasons wanted to bring the life of the king to an end. Shockingly, the royal family were not consulted on this, and also the admission that the doctor wanted to bring the lives to an end in a timely manner so it could be reported in the Times is shocking. He was a king who oversaw the victory of the First World War, but George V was a very sick and ill man during his life at times, and his life is one which was brought to an end sooner than nature intended. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.